Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
And now we can officially confirm that the hosts of the FIFA World Cup 2030 will be Morocco, Portugal, and Spain. Mabruk, felicitations.
The dramatic music signals it all. That's FIFA President Gianni Infantino announcing the host of the 2030 World Cup in a live stream yesterday to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first World Cup, which was held in Uruguay. The first 3 games will be in South America, a match apiece in Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay. And then, after that, came the announcement for 2034.
And last but not least, it is a great pleasure that I can confirm that the host of the FIFA World Cup 2034 will be Saudi Arabia. Mabruk, Mabruk to our friends.
Perhaps the dramatic music and pause was not necessary because Saudi Arabia was the only bidder for the 2034 World Cup. It'll be the second country from the Middle East to host this tournament. Qatar was the first in 2022. Following years of accusations of serious migrant labor and human rights abuses, there are many fears that this could happen again in Saudi Arabia, a country with a known track record of violating human rights. Håvard Malnes is the editor of the football investigative journalism outlet Josimar, is in Oslo this morning. Håvard, hello.
Hello, Matt, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. As I mentioned, perhaps not a lot of drama around this, given that Saudi Arabia was the only bidder for the 2034 Men's World Cup. What do we know about why it went to Saudi Arabia?
Because FIFA President Gianni Infantino wanted it to be Saudi Arabia that was going to be hosting the 2034 World Cup. Last October, FIFA suddenly decided to open the bidding for the World Cup in 2034, and they gave a deadline of 25 days. And by no one's surprise, the only bidder was Saudi Arabia. So it was kind of Infantino paved the way for the bid and for Saudi Arabia being hosting the 2034 World Cup.
What would make that attractive for FIFA to have the World Cup, the Men's World Cup in Saudi Arabia?
That's a really good question, and with a really easy answer. It's all about money. So Saudi Arabia is investing heavily in sport, as we all know. They more or less bought the sport of golf, and the last few years they've turned their eyes to football as well, and they have the Saudi Pro League. Have some really good players like Cristiano Ronaldo, who reportedly earns $200 million per season playing in Saudi Arabia. So FIFA is all about the money, and Saudi Arabia has a lot of it, and also Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy with a dictator, Mohammed bin Salman. So it's really convenient for FIFA to kind of cooperate with a dictator, much easier than cooperating with the democracies, because then you have to have transparent governance, and you don't need that for 2034.
What do you think Saudi Arabia is trying to do in terms of building up its image through sport? As you mentioned, Saudi Arabia has spent something like $6.2 billion on high-level sport since 2021.
Yeah, well, it's a long time since football was just football. Football these days is a geopolitical tool, and hosting a mega event like the World Cup, maybe the biggest sports event in the world, it gets you a seat around the table in international politics. And last week, French President Macron opened the Notre Dame, and all the leading political figures in the world was there, and also FIFA President Gianni Infantino. So, Mohammed bin Salman wants his Saudi Arabia to shine on the world stage, and And that is, that is actually happening now, and will happen with the World Cup. Is quite amazing, since 5 years ago, when the Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi was beheaded, and both U.S. authorities, the UN, concluded that this beheading was ordered by Mohammed bin Salman himself.
Amnesty International has called Saudi Arabia's human rights record atrocious. This World Cup bid is already being compared in some ways to the World Cup that was held in Qatar in 2022. You were there in Qatar, half a dozen times covering that World Cup and the construction of the stadiums leading up to the tournament and then what happened after. What did you take from that?
Well, every time I went to Qatar, it was to tell the stories of the migrant workers, because in the Gulf, in the GCC countries, you have something called the kafala system, which means as a worker, you're kind of your employer's hostage. So what happens when you're working under the kafala system is that once you arrive, your employer will confiscate your passport. You will have no possibility to leave your employer or the work without his without him allowing it. You can't change job. So in practice, you are kind of a hostage. And these migrant workers, they're getting paid between $1 and $2 per hour. Many of them work 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And their work is hard, and also it's under a burning sun. The temperatures both in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia can reach mid 40s, almost 50 degrees Celsius, and laying asphalt for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not too many can take it. And what we saw in Qatar was that the majority of workers that died, they died of something called heat stress. So which is they died of exhaustion. So and what we saw in Qatar, because the project in Saudi Arabia, it's much bigger. They're going to build 11 new stadiums. They're going to have something like 200,000 new hotel.
I mean, one of these stadiums is going to be 350 meters on top of a building in a city that doesn't exist yet.
Yes, NEOM and one of our journalists was in NEOM 3 days ago. And he could tell that the real construction hadn't really started yet. They're still doing the groundwork. But just for NEOM, it's expected that the Saudis need to bring in hundreds of thousands migrant workers, maybe millions. So and the biggest, the biggest scandal here is that FIFA is awarding the World Cup to a nation that practice modern slavery, and all the human rights organizations, they fear that as a result of yesterday's decision, thousands, if not 10,000s and 10,000s of migrant workers will die as a result of this.
I have to let you go, but what is the message to fans? Because after the Qatar World Cup and all of the attention that was paid on the construction of those stadiums, the World Cup, from many perspectives, was a huge success. The stadiums were full, the fans showed up, there was record TV ratings, there were great sporting stories and triumphs. What is the message to fans, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's a middle finger to the fans, this decision, because football is about unity, it's about fair play, and nothing about yesterday's decision reflects that.
Do you think fans care about that?
We live in a time where it's a kind of like a constant information war. It's propaganda everywhere. So fans should care about other people's lives. And no tournament, can be defended when it has a human cost like what we're gonna see in Saudi Arabia.
Håvard Melnes, I'm glad to talk to you about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Håvard Melnes is editor of the football investigative journalism outlet Josimar. He was in Oslo.